In just a few short days, many of you guys watching today's video will probably go to the Ignition Assault sneak peek. Those are happening this weekend, and the Chase secret rare, at least right now, is Lightning Storm. And not only is it the most expensive, most sought after card in this set, it is also one of the prismatic secret rares now known as Starlight rares, which is pretty insane. And while it is impressive that this card is not only just for back row decks, it also has like a Regeki / Lightning Vortex effect. In general, people are thinking about this card as 3 copies of Harpy's Feather Duster, but legal in the TCG. Because I know a lot of you guys play decks that Lightning Storm is really good against, I want to make today's video talking through my favorite counters to Lightning Storm. I do want to mention that with one exception, all of these cards are not perfect. So you really have to sort of go off of what I'm saying here and decide for yourself which one of these or which couple of these are best for your particular deck. As always, if you guys like to purchase any of the cards that I talk about in today's video, please use my link to tcgplayer.com in the description below. And just so we're all on the same page here, I think that in general, Lightning Storm will not be a main deck card, it'll be a side deck option. So these are cards that you might not necessarily have in your main deck, but rather in your side deck for when you go first and you think your opponent might side into Lightning Storm. This also is not a comprehensive list. I'm not going to mention every single form of spell negation in the entire game, but rather focus on the ones that I feel are the most likely to actually be competitively viable in the upcoming format. Just in case you don't know what this card does already, it is a normal spell card, and it says, if you control no face-up cards, activate one of these effects. You can either destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls or destroy all back row your opponent controls. And then of course, like many cards, it is a hard once per turn effect. Now while this card does not always have to be used going second on the first turn, in general that's when I expect it to be played the most. Once you get even just one face-up card on the field, you just can't activate Lightning Storm anymore. In that way, it's actually even harder to use in the mid game and something like Evenly Match, because even if you have like 1 or 2 cards on the field, you can still set Evenly Match and use it in a battle phase if your opponent has way more cards than you. However, with Lightning Storm, once you have just one single thing, unless you clear your board somehow, you're not going to be able to use it. So you might actually see this card not be as popular in decks that can't OTK the opponent. Regardless, this card is still going to be very, very popular. There is no doubt about that. So if you are playing a back row deck, you want to be prepared with some of the cards that I'm talking about in today's video. First up, let's talk about the counter that basically has no downsides and you absolutely should be playing 3 of in any back row strategy, and you probably already were, and that is Solemn Judgment. So Solemn Judgment is a counter trap card, a couple of these are, and it says when a monster or monsters would be summoned or a spell / trap card is activated, pay half your life points to negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. This is by far the best counter, not only to Lightning Storm, but almost any card in the game. I mean, sure, it can't negate everything, it can't negate monster effects, for example, but as far as summons and spell and trap card activations go, this is the best card to beat them. Solemn Judgment is pretty straightforward. You want your opponent to use that Lightning Storm first, and they do as well, so you can hit it with a Solemn Judgment before you lose all of your back row. I do want to give a word of warning though that I feel like a lot of people might get baited on, and that's that if your opponent is activating only one card, you know, they activate a very powerful spell card, not one that's destroying your back row, but just a very good card in general, or perhaps they have a very powerful normal summon, I would advise you to, if possible, hold that Solemn Judgment, because there are some cases, or were some cases in the past, where you would want to use this card on like the first card your opponent used if it was really, really good. But now that Lightning Storm exists, I wouldn't advise that, because even though Lightning Storm requires your opponent to have no face-up cards, so you might think if they're summoning a monster that they don't actually have a Lightning Storm. If it was their very first card and you stopped it, well, now they control no face-up cards, so they can hit you with that Lightning Storm. In games 2 and 3, holding the Solemn Judgment until your opponent drops a Twin Twisters or Evenly Match has always been a really good play, but especially right now that Lightning Storm is going to be all over the place, you really, really want to make sure that Solemn Judgment is getting used on whatever is going to impact your field the most. And now I'll talk about the rest of the cards, which all have at least one downside, but are still pretty competent counters to Lightning Storm. As always, you can only play 3 copies of a card, you can only play 3 copies of Judgment, so you probably want a few other cards just to make sure you don't get blown out by Lightning Storm or anything else like Evenly Match or Twin Twisters. Anyway, the first card is Dark Bribe, and I know I've made fun of this card in the past, but it actually did end up seeing play, especially last year and the year before, mostly in decks like True Dracos and Paleozoic Frogs, and a couple times in Altergeist. Now, on paper, this might seem like a pretty good counter to Lightning Storm, and it certainly is. You know, it negates a spell or trap card, but it does give your opponent one free draw. draw. I will say that even though this does negate the Lightning Storm, it is a little risky. It's a little risky because there are a lot of other forms of back row removal out there, not just Lightning Storm. The Evenly Matched, the Twin Twisters, the one copy of Red Reboot, even things beyond that like Denko Sekka, which I don't believe any of these cards work against except Judgment, but still, there are a lot of cards that are out there to blow up all of your back row so you don't get a chance to use them. And for that reason, it might actually be a little bit too risky to give your opponent one free draw, because you might negate a Lightning Storm and accidentally give your opponent a better card like Evenly Match or Red Reboot, which is obviously not what you're looking for. There is one pretty big benefit of Dark Bribe that Solemn Judgment also has that the other cards on the list don't have, and that's that you don't have to use it against Lightning Storm or Evenly Match or Twin Twisters if your opponent does not have those cards, like they didn't draw them in their opening 6 cards when you go first. You can at least use Dark Bribe against their just other good spells and traps, unlike some of the other entries on the list that are only good against back row removal specifically. So while this card is pretty risky and probably the most risky choice on this entire list, it still might end up seeing a little bit of play, so I'd consider it when you're building your side deck for a back row strategy. Next up, we have Waking the Dragon, a more modern release, and this card is pretty good against Lightning Storm. So what does it do? Well, it is a trap card that says if this set card in its owner's control has left the field because of an opponent's card effect and is now in the graveyard or banished, you can special summon one monster from your deck or extra deck. And keep in mind, this is not a hard once per turn ability. So this one counters quote-unquote Lightning Storm in a different way than most of the other cards we're going to talk about, because while all the other cards are trying to prevent the Lightning Storm from happening, Waking the Dragon is sort of the opposite. It lets the Lightning Storm happen, it lets the Twin Twisters happen or whatever, but then it rewards the player for having this card set. There are a whole bunch of really strong extra deck monsters that you can summon with this card. So things like Last Warrior from Another Planet or things like Naturia Exterio have been fan favorite go-tos. Also cards like Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon is just a big monster that is unaffected by card effects. All of those are really great choices, but also you can get advantage by summoning your own monsters from your deck. In Altergeist, for example, if you had 2 Waking the Dragon set and your opponent destroyed them both with Lightning Storm, you might find it most beneficial to summon a Hexia from the extra deck and a Multi-Faker from your deck. In that way, yes, your opponent destroyed your back row, but you gained a Hexia, you gained a Multi-Faker, you gained a Silk, and now, even though you've lost all of your back row, you have 2 interruptions. You have a Hexia negate, you have a Silk bounce, and that's really, really awesome. While that might not be applicable for every single back row deck, it still is a small portion of what makes Waking the Dragon really, really strong, and it sort of takes a different approach compared to the other options on this list. Waking the Dragon also can trigger off of all sorts of cards, not just Lightning Storm. It can be Twin Twisters, it can be Dingirsu, it can be your opponent's Molaseek. There are like a million cards out there. Well, not that many, but there's a lot of cards out there that you can use Waking the Dragon against, and oftentimes you can just win a game off of it alone, which is really, really appealing. I'd also highly recommend playing this card if you are main or side decking Trap Trick, because if you have a Trap Trick and your opponent Lightning Storms you, this is an excellent card, possibly one of the best cards to set so that you actually make an impact on the board after the Lightning Storm. While that might not be applicable for every single deck because Trap Trick isn't the most popular card right now, if you're playing a deck like Paleozoics, which is already likely playing Trap Trick, this seems like an automatic include for your side deck. The main downside of this card though is that it just sits there unless your opponent does something, and in general when you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! You want to have cards that you can proactively use to put pressure on the opponent. And you might say that for all of the entries on this list that is technically true, but Waking the Dragon is one of the most frustrating cards sometimes, because for example, if you have 3 back row and one of them is Waking the Dragon and your opponent has a Twin Twisters but not a Lightning Storm, well, some of the time, not all the time, but a couple times they're going to hit the other 2 back row. Now you just have a face down card that you can't activate. Waking the Dragon, like Dark Bribe, is a high risk, high reward type card because sometimes it just sits there and does nothing. Still, if cards like Lightning Storm and Twin Twisters end up being the go-to forms of back row removal instead of cards like Evenly Match, Waking the Dragon might be one of the best options out there. Next up, we have Starlight Road, a card that many of you probably don't even realize was pretty much a staple 1 or 2 of for many formats. Like, this card was so popular back in the day, and for a good reason. It stopped Heavy Storm, which is actually very similar to why I'm suggesting it right now. We're now using it against Lightning Storm, but also it can be used against cards like Black Rose Dragon and Torrential Tribute. But nowadays, yeah, we're mostly focusing on cards like Lightning Storm and Twin Twisters, which this card is exceptionally good against. This is a normal trap card that says when a card or effect is activated that would destroy 2 or more cards you control, negate that effect, and if you do, destroy that card. Then you can special summon one Stardust Dragon from your extra deck. The big advantage that this card has over other options, even Waking the Dragon, is that not only does it prevent the Twin Twisters or Lightning Storm from blowing up your back row, but also you get a free Stardust Dragon. And while Stardust Dragon is not as good or as popular as it used to be, it still is really good in back row decks when you can summon it for free. If your opponent had multiple forms of back row removal, not only can you stop the first one, but the Stardust Dragon can stop the other one as well. And yes, sadly the Stardust Dragon will not revive itself in the end phase because it was not properly summoned, but it still is a free negation on top of already negating your opponent's back row removal. The main downside of a card like Starlight Road is that very often, like Waking the Dragon, it might just sit in the back row unless your opponent specifically has a Twin Twisters or Lightning Storm, so I wouldn't suggest playing this card unless both of those spell cards are like the go-to forms of back row removal instead of cards like Evenly Match or Red Reboot. I'll also give a small shout out, or at least a mention to, the Huge Revolution is over, and realistically I think this is just a worse version of Starlight Road, at least for the purposes that I'm talking about in today's video. The main upside here is that it banishes the card that it negates instead of destroying it, which could be valuable in some situations, but against cards like Lightning Storm and Twin Twisters, I can't see that mattering that much, especially not for the trade-off of not summoning a free Stardust Dragon. As it stands right now, and historically speaking this card has never been as popular as Starlight Road, it seems like if you're trying to negate spell or trap cards, not monster cards, that Starlight Road is just better in a lot of ways, most notably for the fact that it summons a free Stardust Dragon. Next up we have Anti-Spell Fragrance, a continuous trap card that says both players must set spell cards before activating them and cannot activate them until the end of their next turn after setting them. So this card is good against Lightning Storm, but not very good against Twin Twisters because they could just chain it to the Anti-Spell Fragrance, but it also has some unique advantages that the other cards don't. Namely, it's really good against Pendulum monsters as well as just other spells in general. I like this card a lot, but I do feel a little bit worried about it because if you've been following, I've mentioned like the same 4 cards a lot: Twin Twisters, Lightning Storm, Evenly Match, and Red Reboot. And while it is true that all of the cards in today's video besides Dark Bribe and Solemn Judgment are not good against all 4 of those, this one is only good against one of those, and that is a Lightning Storm. I'm not sure if that's enough for a back row deck. However, the unique advantage of this card against things like Pendulum and other spell cards that aren't back row removal might be enough for some players to get really excited about it. And if your own deck doesn't actually play a lot of spell cards that Anti-Spell Fragrance really conflicts with, I would recommend at least trying this card out. Once again, I'm not trying to say any of these cards are perfect or any of these cards are terrible. I feel like they're all valid options in different scenarios. This video is more about discussing specific options for a variety of decks and then you yourself coming up with whatever the best option is for your own strategy. That being said, I want to talk about one more card, and I actually was not going to mention this one at first because it's not a generic card that you can use, but it is one of the strongest, so I thought I'd still mention it. That is, of course, Secret Village of the Spellcasters. So this card, the main downside, of course, is pretty obvious. If you're not playing a Spellcaster deck, it literally does nothing and in fact hinders you, which is really bad. However, if you are playing Spellcasters, like an Altergeist for example, you really would consider playing this card. I know that it was played back when Skyscrapers were all over the place, but I think even going forward, this card might still be good, even though Skyscrapers are likely not going to be in the metagame. This video wasn't like a top 5 list. These weren't in any particular order, except for this one, which I put at the very end, because I feel like Altergeist players already know about this card. You know, they probably were already playing it against Skyscrapers, so they're pretty familiar with it, and the average trap deck player probably can't use this card, so it feels like I shouldn't have to mention it, but I will just in case somebody was playing Altergeist for the first time and maybe didn't realize this card was out there or didn't realize it was still good. I still think this card is a very valid option for Altergeist, if not one of the best options besides the obvious Solemn Judgment. Anyway though, hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video about some of my favorite counters to Lightning Storm. Yes, this card is very scary, but there are a lot of other scary forms of back removal that we've had to deal with for quite a while now: Red Reboot and Evenly Match and Twin Twisters. So while Lightning Storm is a very good card and might be very popular when it comes out, I don't think it'll be impossible to play a trap-based strategy once this card actually hits the TCG format. We've had a lot of these cards in the past, and the fact of the matter is that not every single person has space in their side deck to play 15 forms of back row removal, especially if combo decks or one particularly really good combo deck ends up taking over the metagame. People just are not going to have space in their side deck for 6 or 9 or 12 forms of back removal, and they might only play 3. Anyway though, thank you guys so much much for watching today's video. I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.